he's essentially a rapper musician, and they'll
Interesting.
basically put him in the real world and do stuff. So this is kind of an example of like essentially this concept of a virtual influencer. All right. My name is Johnny Rodriguez. I'm a strategic innovation director here at Fresh Consulting, and I have Elisha here with me.
Yes, and I'm the technical innovation director at Fresh Consulting.
Awesome. All right. So today, Elisha, I want to talk to you about something as a topic that's kind of interesting. It is about virtual influencers. Sometimes this is called digital avatars, virtual avatars, but there's this concept of virtual influencers that is going on and has actually existed for quite a while. But there's been some recent news. There's a news article today, and I'll be sharing that with you and hoping to get some live reactions from you about what was talked about on that. But if you look at this topic of virtual influence, how it's being discussed today, right? So if you just type in virtual influencer and go in the past month on news on Google, you can see that there are quite a few things that are being talked about. For example, LG introduced their virtual human, their virtual influencer, signed a record deal after learning to sing. And there's a recent thing recently where they dropped an album essentially. There's a lot of articles even today talking about virtual marketing, virtual influencers, and how marketing is connected to that. Celebrity chefs and essentially virtual celebrity chefs and things like that. So anyway, there's a lot of talk about this. It also has been on my mind because recently I did a podcast for Fresh Consulting where we talked about the metaverse, and I had a guest with me, this guy Dudley Neville Spencer from Virtual Influencer Agency, and they are essentially, their agency is made to help develop brand-owned, character-driven avatars for the metaverse. So they're kind of focused on like this. Let's create an avatar. Let's make him for brands. Let's give them compelling storylines. Let's give them these real lives, essentially in the metaverse, where they're like, they might be on Instagram. They might have Instagram accounts, Twitter accounts, things like that. And so it was kind of a topic. That's when it first kind of came on my radar. So before I dive into that topic, is this something you've heard about before, or is it anything that comes to mind when you think about virtual influencers?
So I'm more familiar with the concept of vtuber. It's like a virtual YouTuber. It kind of started like in Japan, and it's more for like a lot of like Asian population in Asia. Like we don't really show ourselves on our screen. It's in the US, you have your own like personal branding with your full name and your full face, and like it's more about professional network building, your personal brand building.
Yep.
But in countries like Japan, you don't really want to use your real name or show your real face. The world is so small, people can make fun of you. It might affect your job hunting process. You don't really want to stand out too much in those cultures. So there is a VTuber that existed for a long time, and they also have an agency and like companies backing those things up. But those were primarily like more 2D, like a shaded, like animated style, kind of borrowing those animated style from like Japanese animations and stuff. But I think you're talking more about like a 3D version of the avatar, it sounds like.
I think theoretically it would be like a 3D version. I think the main difference between a VTuber and maybe a virtual influencer, just so we can distinguish that a little bit, is a VTuber, I think as you put up on the screen here, actually, it says they're typically they're on YouTube. They're virtual avatars of themselves that are doing live streaming. And so usually it's like they're doing gaming or they're talking about something or doing things, and it's more of a live version. And it's also a consumer, essentially, like maybe a content creator on YouTube.
Yeah,
maybe the best way to look at it. Whereas a virtual influencer typically refers to a brand. So think about like if you own a magazine company and you may want to represent your brand, you could just say like, hey, let's get a host, right? If you think about like Progressive and how they have flow, right, from progressive. That's a real human that's representing a company. A virtual influencer would be somebody's gone and created maybe a hyper realistic, or maybe not. Maybe it's just a 2D kind of block, or maybe an object or an animal where it represents their company in a way. So maybe some things that come to mind that you might recognize that are a little bit more, that have been around for a while, and I think more recently, as this concept of virtual influencers come around, I think it's been embraced even more. So if you think about the gecko from Geico, right, they've always represented their company as a virtual gecko. And it's been more of like a funny thing to put in there, and there's all their commercials, they really like use that gecko everywhere on their marketing, their website, their videos. It's been on the Super Bowl. And that gecko actually has followers on Instagram, and it has a personality, and it has a life, and there's a branding company or marketing part of their company that's like developing that and thinking about how they might leverage the gecko. So that's maybe an example that we're familiar with. So this is a website called virtualhumans.org, and you get a sense for what exists out there. So this is the second one I was going to mention. You might have seen Barbie. Barbie's been around, and they've used Barbie as a virtual influencer in a way. Anyway, those are kind of some examples that exist with it, but it can actually be a character that animates, that's more of line art or 2D, or it can be more hyper realistic like some of these. So let me give you a sense for this. So this is Lu Do Magalu. I'm not saying that right at all. This is essentially this is created by a magazine called Luiza. It's one of the biggest retail companies in Brazil, and they created this character called Lu of Magalu, back in 2009, and basically they use them for social media. So if I go to Instagram, let me open up a few of these: Twitter, TikTok. So here's Instagram. 5.8 million followers. It's a virtual 3D influencer. And so you see her cooking, you see her tweeting, you see her wearing products, you see her doing selfies with a drink. You know what I mean? And you're getting 2,000, likes. And so this is real. Like, this is real. This is probably the largest one. So she has 5.8 million followers on Instagram. She has 14 million followers on Facebook. Twitter is about 1.3. Her TikTok is at 6.2 million followers, so quite a lot. And you can see that there's stuff like that. So retrospectives of 2021, they'll do the dances, she'll go and bake cakes and bake cookies, do her nails. So it's quite a lot of stuff that the virtual character will do. Pretty interesting.
Wow.
And I won't go through a lot of these, but essentially I wanted to show that there are a few. Let me go back to this. There are a few that exist out there. There's another one that's really interesting to me called Lil Michaela. She's a little bit more well known, Michaela Souza. And Michaela essentially is a virtual fashion model who's worked with some of the biggest top fashion brands like Prada, Dior, Calvin Klein. It's created actually by a startup based out of LA, and their company called Brud. They've created two of them actually. And essentially they call her Lil Michaela. She's 19. She does music, she does fashion. So she's a musician. She has a whole backstory. And Lil Michaela has 3.1 million Instagram followers, 3.4 followers on TikTok, 30,000 followers on Twitter. I mean, so people are using this. So this one's a little bit different. So I want to show you this one as well. So you can see to the point of the 2D, right? So you're seeing her with other people. And
is it the other real people, or is it?
These are real people. So you can see her with her boyfriend. That's a real person with her, right? Her doing some stuff there with her boyfriend. So there's a whole backstory, and people are actually invested in learning and following this character that's been built essentially. But at the end of the day, she's a model. She's a virtual model, and there's a ton of stuff going on there. So anyway, it's kind of a 19-year-old robot living in LA is what they say here. So this is an American one. In England, there's a really popular one called FN Mecca, and I won't talk about how big he is or anything, but he's actually a rapper. So he actually produces music, and if I go to like TikTok, for example, you'll see that he's actually like juggling, and this is a very hyper realistic version here. I'll mute this, but you can see him. It's kind of a scary looking avatar, but he's essentially a rapper musician, and they'll
Interesting.
basically put him in the real world and do stuff. So this is kind of an example of like essentially this concept of a virtual influencer, where it's representing a brand or a company like that. Maybe Minnie Mouse maybe is a better example that you might be familiar with. There's a lot in here that exist, and a lot of these have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of followers. Here's another hyper realistic one that came out more recently. So a lot of these are happening today. And so part of why I wanted to bring this up is like, this has been around. There's some like some interesting use cases for why this might be good, right? But today there was something on the news that came from NBC News, and I wanted to share this with you because
Okay.
I think it'll be interesting to kind of get your live reaction to it. And it's coming from a company called Elite World Group. Elite World Group is essentially a talent media company, and they represent a lot of personalities like in fashion, sports, entertainment, culture. So there's a lot of brand, like Cindy Crawford's part of this. You have like, I think some of the Jenner, or I guess the Jenner, like I think it's Caitlyn Jenner, Russell Westbrook from the Lakers, so there's like a lot of big celebrities, creatives and stuff that are part of this. Essentially, I think they have about 5,000. And so they announced something today that I wanted to share with you.
Elite World Group CEO Julia Hart is actually digitizing celebrities. She's making lifelike avatars of the world's best-known models, performers, and influencers, and launching them into the metaverse.
This might look like something out of the future. Well, guess what? That future is now.
The metaverse is here to stay.
That's right, the metaverse. Basically a new virtual world. Think video games and augmented reality, but with more intersection and overlap.
Let me pause this for a second. So on the screen here, you can see that it actually says digital celebrities, and they talk about avatars in the metaverse. So there's kind of this concept. You often do bundle the metaverse with a lot of the virtual influencers, but some of the things I was showing you, they're not in Decentraland, they're not in Somnium Space or the Sandbox or any of those kind of virtual environments. They're more of just marketing on social media, and so what she's particularly saying is it's going to be kind of a combo of that a little bit. Kind of an interesting title they use though, digital celebrities.
Interesting. So instead of like pre-compiled graphics or videos, we're talking about celebrity self existing in metaverse as like a character like walking around in the space.
Yes. So as it represents the metaverse, it would be that. It would be essentially you can interact with that, and the CEO will talk about that. So I'm going to keep playing a little bit.
Okay.
So you can watch that.
I started avatars, the metaverse, all of this, digitalizing the company, transforming ourselves into a media conglomerate the day I took over. I saw this coming. Our avatars are what we call very hyper-realistic avatars. These are not cartoon characters. They are computer-generated images of the person.
Take Jasmine Sanders, for instance, a model and influencer with nearly 5 million followers, and now a nearly identical avatar. Hart says having this digital clone can transform the lives of her clients by essentially allowing them to be everywhere at once, and the lives of their fans around the globe, hoping for a piece of them.
Your avatar doesn't get old. It doesn't get sick. It doesn't need to travel. It doesn't have to worry about COVID. Jasmine's avatar can walk 14 runways in 14 different countries while she's napping. Jasmine can take you shopping at your favorite website. You can hang with Jasmine and she can tell you which outfits she likes on you.
The process to create one is tedious. A full day of 360 imaging and motion capture to train your avatar to move like you.
They make you do all sorts of things. Laugh, cry, frown, get angry, get happy. Every range of emotions so that your avatar, when it has that emotion, looks like you.
All right. Let me stop that for now. She eventually talks about, some of the AI that might be related, where it's like you can train it over time for it to know how you would respond to something and get a sense for how, like, your intonation and things like that. And eventually the character can live on its own in like a metaverse or in a virtual environment where you can interact with it, like she said, on a website or as it shops around with you, and you'll interact with an AI version of that celebrity. in a virtual kind of environment. So kind of an interesting concept, right?
Yeah, I think so. There's like a portion of the AI that you mentioned on the last part where like it might have its own mindset, which might be the end state. But right now it's like, how do we capture the person as much as you can with the 360 camera and motion capturing. So it's not just it's not just going to the avatar maker and make someone that looks like you.
No.
But it's like tracing like as much as you can about the person. And if you tie it to celebrity, then yeah, if they show up on virtual TV shows and virtual runway shows, you can have multiple of them doing different works. That's very interesting concept.
Yeah. So if you're a brand, if you're a company, right, and you're thinking about how might I participate in the metaverse, right? Maybe it's kind of like a big jump to say, maybe let's buy land in one of the kind of existing virtual worlds. But it might be more of like a, how do we represent our brand virtually? Maybe it can be this concept of a virtual influencer, right? This concept of virtual influencer can be a path to go down where it represents your company. It uses the voice of your brand. It might actually be represented. It could be matched to a real person as well, right? That's what they're doing here at the Elite World Group, right? It's real people that are then digitized. But companies can think about how they can be represented in a virtual environment, and that could turn into social media, right? Followers and things like that. And people do and get invested in these characters. It's like watching a movie, Elisha, right? It's like I watch a movie and like people still cry. Like I remember, and I hate to admit this, but I remember watching Toy Story 3, but I'm getting emotional at what I was watching because I was moved by what I was watching and these like little animated characters, right? And so I got invested with these characters over, what is that? A few hours of Toy Story movies. Imagine if you followed these people over time for years, you get invested in their lives and who they're dating and what they're buying and so, especially this younger generation, I think they're going to grow up seeing that blurred line of interacting or seeing more and more virtual influencers, essentially brands represented in a virtual environment through a character.
I can see like Japan, Korea, China, like those countries who have those abilities to produce those like high quality animation characters, like getting into the metaverse space and do more there, because a lot of them prefer to have that virtual interaction experience versus having like a real person doing all the stuff. And like it also reminded me of the movie, the Will Smith.
Oh yeah.
Younger self.
Yeah, Gemini Man. I definitely saw this.
It can get into the whole movie production done by all the virtual celebrities, so that they don't even have to do real acting and they can just be taking a nap, and it's all computer generated action. So you don't even you might have to pay them a license fee, right, to use their avatar in the movie, but they don't have to pay for physical labor. They don't have to go to a location to shoot a movie. They don't have to hire camera crews. So you can just do everything computer generated, and that's kind of interesting world that we're getting into. Yeah.
So if you're a movie star, where theoretically you could say, okay, yes, I'll allow my avatar to play in that movie. I know that in this particular case with Gemini Man, and actually with like Planet of the Apes and a lot of those movies, they'll do motion capture. So they'll have all these dots and there's a camera that's facing them and they're actually acting it. I know Will Smith acted his other younger version and he had to react, with an actor in front of him, right? But essentially he played both. But to your point, in the future, it might turn into that where it's like, no, it's already been mapped. It already has some of the, you're baking in certain personality or movements or things like that would feel natural. And then it's like you're allowing your face as a virtual character to be leveraged. So anyway, that's the kind of the start of the topic of the virtual influencer. I think we'll see more and more this year across bigger, especially like media companies, fashion companies. I think we'll see more and more brands embrace it. Those that were originally 2D, we might start seeing 2D get animated, or 2D go to 3D or hyper realism, and then I think we'll start to see those in these other environments, virtual worlds and things like that, represented. I think the AI portion's a little bit further out, but it'll be interesting to kind of keep an eye on that as we go through 2022.